And where's your mask?
Dashcam. While pop culture YouTubers were collecting super chats, bitching about Star Wars or The Little Mermaid, hoping against hope that their next fix of corporate slop would be slightly less propagandized than the last, they should have been championing a film like Dashcam that actively spits in the eye of the status quo. It's a green text thread in cinematic form. It's YouTube friend simulator schizoposting, harnessed into a blood-soaked, apocalyptic fever dream. You can imagine how that went over with some critics. A William Bibiani, he/him, for the Wrap writes, "The problem with making the protagonist of your horror movie an unlikable human being is that, at the risk of being redundant, the protagonist of your horror movie is an unlikable human being. In many horror movies, she'd be the character who'd either die first or die late in the film, just so they can make life harder for the real heroes before meeting their third act, thematically approved demise." Mike Donato, gender unknown, for Paste Magazine writes, "Rob Savage's Dashcam is the equivalent of strapping a GoPro to a Republican edgelord's dirty diaper and throwing it into a blender. What might have at one point been conceived as a heckling right-wing attempt to troll leftists becomes a legitimately hazardous form of misinformation, smuggled as a nonsensical horror flick that learns nothing from decades of found footage mistakes. Its thematic defiance against an ongoing pandemic is disgusting without a point, which is the pinnacle of lazy, thoughtless screenwriting that exists to outrage because, well, because."
Yes, lockdown, getting it on. Having to fuck your own dad, come on, that's rough. But we do what we must. If you can't be free, you must commit the sin of incest. It's not the worst, but it's not the best.
Indeed, filmed and set during the COVID lockdowns, Dashcam follows Los Angeles provocateur Annie Hardy on a trip to England where she reunites with her former bandmate, steals his car, and unwittingly sets the both of them on a madcap collision course with the forces of darkness. Meanwhile, live streaming it all, or else most of it, to an audience of weirdo memesters chiming in down in the corner. I have to admit I'm kind of a sucker for the found footage subgenre, but no other entry that I can recall so authentically captures the intimate, voyeuristic friend simulator vibe like Dashcam does. It's like watching your favorite YouTuber or podcaster being chased through an abandoned amusement park by a demon. The main reason why all of this works so well is due to the charm of its lead actress, Annie Hardy. Annie Hardy plays Annie Hardy. The story goes that co-writer Jed Shepherd and writer-director Dan Savage came up with the idea after watching a YouTube show Hardy was doing at the time called Bandcar, and decided to transmute the show and her personality into a horror film. Probably only Annie Hardy herself really knows how much of what appears on screen is an authentic representation of who she is or what she believes, and indeed, not every critic or audience member who's seen the film seems keen to respect or entertain the idea that there's any difference at all between Annie Hardy the character and Annie Hardy the performer. In another excerpt from Mike Donato's review for The Wrap, he writes, "Dashcam isn't Savage acting as a provocateur who dares audiences to sympathize with the fictitious version of Annie Hardy we meet. You can find variations, and repetitions, of what Annie's character spews on Hardy's real social media, or Hardy's real podcast. There's no clear delineation between Hardy, actress and musician, and Annie, the on-screen toxic spreader of misinformation in her red MAGA hat. Dashcam's creators will probably hide behind the argument that unlikable protagonists aren't endorsements, or how filmmakers can't challenge audiences these days, but that angle is rendered void by Hardy's public records. Sometimes the worst thing a film can do is betray our expectations. I've seen Dashcam twice now, and I remember the first time watching it I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. My brain was so wired to modern media as struggle session that I just assumed Annie Hardy's character was put there to be torn down and made an example of. I watched Dashcam the way a dog watches a rolled-up newspaper, and yet as the film went on, that swat on the nose never came. And by the time it was over, I felt I had watched the first truly unsanctioned, semi-mainstream film in forever. I imagine that's how these critics must have felt, likewise assuming that as sure as the sun rises in the east, that this loudmouth in a MAGA hat was bound to get her comeuppance. I can only imagine their shock and revulsion when she didn't. Had they known ahead of time how things would have turned out, surely they would have avoided the film altogether, would have relied on the steady hand of some clandestine moderation team to strike it from existence. If nothing else, Dashcam is remarkable for giving some of these joyless schoolmarms a taste of what their political and cultural opposites have been going through for the last few years. Sometimes being deliberately provocative is its own virtue. How is a film like this made then? How does it wind up on Hulu next to Oprah's The Hair Tales? Is Dashcam controlled opposition? Is Dashcam the glowy corporate singularity testing the waters for how soon a new frontier of anti-woke media might be made viable for advertisers? We may never know. None of this is to say that the only appeal of the film lies in its political declarations. I can think of another film in recent memory, Dragged Across Concrete, that when it came out was propped up by both audiences and critics, albeit with different intentions, as some sort of cultural antagonist, but then failed to follow through as anything more than that. At one point, the film Alita Battle Angel was being held up as some sort of banner for apolitical, escapist entertainment, which is cool. It's cool to like something, but I have my doubts whether it wasn't just some sort of coping mechanism to get through the doldrums of a fallow media landscape. Dashcam, meanwhile, is an honest-to-God berserker of a horror movie. Our heroes go through blood, shit, piss, and puke, falling out of trees, stepping on dirty needles, and getting into multiple car crashes as they contend with demonic forces far beyond their understanding. It's the opposite of a slow burn, a lean, manic fever dream where the characters careen from one bad situation to the next. It's a movie that knows it's competing against TikTok and NyQuil chicken. Heads are ripped off, arms broken so that the bones splinter through the skin, and all of it, at least as far as I could tell, done through classic, practical effects. It's the kind of blood and guts every horror fan tries recapturing after Evil Dead and Texas Chainsaw have long been committed to memory, wading through the mire of forgotten direct-to-video refuse before finally striking upon the occasional gem. Speaking of Texas Chainsaw, go check out some of the original reviews for the film. They read a lot like the modern reviews for Dashcam. The best of horror is always out to make the prim and sensible New York movie critics squirm. Murder and mayhem, that's old and routine by now. None of that gets a rise out of anyone. But put it in a MAGA hat, and now we're back to the glory days when that sort of thing was simply too dangerous for public consumption. Dashcam succeeds as not just a horror, but a comedy. Think Evil Dead 2, if not in tone necessarily, then in the way it's able to maintain such a delicate balance between the laughs and the scares. The manic, confrontational tenor of the horror seems to exist on the same wavelength as Annie Hardy's manic, confrontational wisecracking. In the end, it's hard to say just how Dashcam will be appraised once the culture war is finally over, if indeed it ever is. Maybe the whole thing will be too niche, too of its time for future generations to make sense of. Maybe watching the film will incur too high a penalty on the old social credit score. In a just and sane world, Dashcam will one day be looked on as a cult classic, not just as a sort of time capsule from when half the world really did lose their fucking minds, but as a rip-roaring genre mainstay. In a just and sane world, Annie Hardy will get her due. In a just and sane world.
Ring, ring, I'm calling them up. What you up to today, you dumb fucks? Staying inside, hashtag staying safe? Man, you can suck my quick. Is it safe to be so lonely? Everybody's trying to kill themselves. This place is like a living hell for something with a 99.6 recovery rate.